You once believed that when they discarded you, it was undeniable proof that you had become meaningless in their eyes. You thought they walked away because they had found a new source of supply, someone more exciting, more compliant, easier to control. And in that moment, you questioned where you went wrong, what you lacked, or how they could replace you so quickly. But the truth was never about you. It was about their fear. When a narcissist chooses to discard you, it is not the moment they feel stronger. It is the moment they realize you have seen too much. You started noticing the patterns, the contradictions, the subtle manipulations. You sensed the insecurity they hid beneath their manufactured confidence. You saw the small cracks in their persona, cracks they themselves are terrified to face. And for a narcissist, being seen is a greater threat than any form of resistance. Because your awakened eyes make them feel exposed, fragile, and breakable. They know that if they stay, their mask will deteriorate quickly. They know you no longer believe every word, no longer react on cue, no longer fall into the emotional loops they control. So they leave not because you lack value, but because you are no longer bait for their game. They need a fresh audience, someone who has never seen their rage, never witnessed their lies, never recognized their repeating cycles. And they want to run from you, because you have become the one mirror that reflects the thing they fear most, their inner emptiness. That is why almost every discard contains a deeper paradox. They abandon you to avoid facing themselves. But what they never expect is this: after they leave, their real fears begin. Fears that never show on their face, but silently torment them in the background. From the fear of your prolonged silence, to the fear of you becoming stronger and brighter, to the fear of you meeting someone better, to the fear that you finally understand their entire game. These are the 8 fears they hide behind arrogance, indifference, and their dramatic post-breakup performances. But deep down, it is the discard itself that destabilizes them the most. And now, we're going to break down each of those fears, every layer of darkness they never wanted you to see. 1. They fear your silence. The narcissist's first fear actually begins in the distorted structure of their ego. In their inner world, every relationship follows one single script. They are the center. They set the emotional rhythm, and you are expected to react accordingly. So when they discard you, their imagination only allows for one outcome: that you will suffer, panic, text them, call them, try to explain, beg for another chance, or at the very least show that you are collapsing under the weight of the loss. To them, that is the natural logic of the world. They abandon, you break, you beg, they grant, you hurt, they feel powerful. It's the same loop they've used with countless people before you. But because they believe in that script so deeply, the moment you break it with one simple action, silence, their entire ego structure begins to crack. You don't react the way they expect. You don't shout, don't question, don't try to pull them back. And this creates a violent internal conflict within them. Their familiar script no longer works. Carl Jung once said, "The inflated ego exists only when it is mirrored, isontomate," meaning their distorted self only survives when someone continuously feeds it. When you go silent, when you refuse to play the old role, they don't just feel confused, they begin to lose their sense of existence. From here, anxiety emerges as an instinctive reaction. Dr. Heinz Kohut, in his foundational work on self-psychology, showed that when a self-object, the emotional supply, withdraws suddenly, the narcissist experiences self-fragmentation, a collapse of the ego structure that once maintained their false emotional stability. This explains why your silence is stronger than any words. It doesn't just irritate them, it destroys the psychological pillar they depend on. Dr. Roy Baumeister's research on power and obsession also shows that humans become most obsessed with what they cannot control. And in this case, You, the person who used to be in their hands, suddenly become something they cannot predict, cannot manipulate, cannot dominate. This triggers a mix of curiosity and panic. They begin asking questions they never dared to think before. Why haven't they contacted me? Are they seeing someone else? Are they happy without me? Are they forgetting me? Have they seen through me? Did I lose my power? For a narcissist, these questions are threats. They push them into the dark corner. They've avoided their entire life the truth that they are not as important as they believed. And as the anxiety grows, they do what most narcissists do in the early post-discard stage. They secretly monitor you. They check your social media, see what you're posting, where you are, who you're with, and whether you seem okay. They read your captions, watch your stories, analyze every detail for signs that you're still affected by them. And if you post nothing at all, they panic even more because your digital silence leaves them with no access to your inner world. And that is their real fear. The fear that they have lost access to the inner space that once fueled their inflated ego. The fear that you are no longer playing the old role. The fear that you have stepped out of their control. And the fear that your silence is a sign you are becoming stronger, brighter, and freer than they ever imagined. 2. They fear your healing. The second fear appears when they realize you're not just silent, you're calm, suspiciously calm. According to their logic, you should have collapsed after being discarded. You should be lost, emotionally shaken, desperately seeking validation from them just to stay upright. But when you quietly stabilize your life, when you don't bring them up, when you don't post heartbreak, when you don't seek comfort from others, they begin to sense that something is off. To them, your healing isn't about you being okay. It is an invisible declaration that they underestimated your inner strength. For a narcissist, this is a blow to the ego. They believed they were the emotional axis of your world, that their absence would throw you into chaos. So any sign that you're recovering triggers deep unease. Not because they care, but because it threatens the story they tell themselves. In analytical psychology, Jung calls this a detachment from the field of influence, a moment where someone steps out of the collective unconscious dynamic of the relationship. This shift of energy makes the other person, the narcissist, feel like they're losing control. At the same time, another phenomenon begins. They compare you to the new supply, and your calmness, ironically, highlights the instability of their new relationship. They notice you moving forward while they repeat the same cycles with someone else. This creates a deeper internal fear, the fear that you are becoming someone they can no longer reach, someone they cannot pull back into the old vortex. Dr. Sandra L. Brown's research on super traits shows that when highly empathetic individuals recover from toxic relationships, they enter a stage of accelerated growth far faster than the abuser can keep up with. This is exactly what terrifies the narcissist. They fear you will rise. They fear you will realize your real worth. They fear you will become more radiant, more confident, more self-possessed, and worst of all, that you will become someone they cannot manipulate anymore. When they see you post happy photos, when they hear you're starting new projects, when they notice you're returning to yourself, their internal insecurity spikes uncontrollably. They start asking themselves whether you're forgetting them, whether you're living well without them, whether you're opening a new life in which they have no place. And once again, they secretly watch you, not to see whether you miss them, but to see whether they still matter. Because for a narcissist, nothing is more terrifying than your recovery, because it proves they never had the power they believed they did. 3. They fear you, telling the truth to others. The third fear begins when they realize you've been silent long enough to finally see everything clearly. For a narcissist, your silence isn't just an exit from the game. It is the return of your intuition, your clarity, and the mental pieces they once worked hard to scatter. When you start connecting the dots, they sense what they fear most. The truth is beginning to take shape inside you. And what terrifies them isn't that you understand them. It's the possibility that you might tell the truth to others. Because image is their religion. Persona, the social mask, is their oxygen, the thing they protect as if it were their life. Carl Jung called this the stage ego, a psychological construct designed to hide the shadow beneath it. Nothing threatens that structure more than the risk of being exposed. As you become more clear-headed, they start imagining scenarios that shake them. What if you tell your friends what really happened? What if your family starts to understand who they truly are? What if your colleagues or community begin questioning their inconsistencies? What if their new partner learns what they once did to you? To you, it's simply the truth. To them, it is collapse. Dr. Martha Stout's research shows that manipulative personalities tie their entire ego to their social image. When that image is threatened, they experience a panic response, an egoic meltdown that pushes them into impulsive, defensive, or narrative controlling behavior. Dr. Jennifer Freyd's work on institutional betrayal also shows that abusers fear most the silent but awakened witness, the one person capable of revealing a truth they cannot deny. And that person is you. Deep inside the narcissist lies a sad belief. They think people only love them for the story they perform, not for who they really are, not for the emptiness behind the mask. So when you, the one who has seen both the darkness and the disguise, now have the ability to speak, they panic at the idea that the image they built could collapse with a single sentence. They fear you'll say they lied. They fear you'll say their love wasn't connection, but control. They fear you'll say that behind the kindness was emptiness. They fear you'll say they used promises to manipulate you. They fear you'll say their tears were not pain, but strategy. Not because you want to hurt them, you never did, but because they know the truth alone is enough to make their mask fall. And that fear makes them hyper-vigilant. They watch who you talk to, what you post, who you connect with, all to ensure you're not telling the story they spent their whole life hiding. To you, the truth is liberation. To them, the truth is a death sentence for the image they cling to. And that is why the third fear haunts them. The fear that you, with a single truth, could make their world collapse. 4. They fear you finding someone better than them. The fourth fear quietly grows when they begin imagining the possibility that you will meet someone kinder, healthier, and emotionally mature enough not to hurt you. For a narcissist, that thought isn't just uncomfortable. It is a direct threat to their ego. Because their power over you was never built on love. It was built on the belief that you would never find anyone like them, that no one could handle you the way they could, that no one would love you the way they claimed to. This is the script they repeat in their mind to maintain emotional superiority. But when they see you healing, taking care of yourself, reconnecting with life, or simply looking lighter without them, a deep undercurrent of insecurity begins to rise. They know that if you truly meet someone healthy, kind, and authentic, they will lose the one thing they believed they owned: your self-doubt. A healthy person will see your light. A mature person won't play manipulation games. A grounded person doesn't need your pain to feel powerful. And this terrifies the narcissist because they know you're not hard to love. You were only hard to deceive. In analytical psychology, Jung described shadow abandonment as the fear of being replaced by a better version, not because the other person is actually superior, but because the narcissist's shadow knows they never offered what they pretended to have. Their fear lies here. If you experience real love, you will look back at your relationship with them through new eyes and realize it was never love, it was possession. And once you understand the difference between real love and counterfeit love, you will never return. Dr. Amir Levine's research on attachment rewiring shows that when someone who has been hurt experiences a healthy relationship, the nervous system restructures the way it interprets intimacy. This makes them permanently less drawn to chaotic, unhealthy partners. This is exactly what the narcissist fears most, that you will wake up from the old illusion. They fear you'll meet someone who respects boundaries, listens, supports you, and doesn't suffocate you. They fear you'll taste the peace they could never offer, and that peace will reveal how toxic they truly were behind the initial charm. And at the core of this fear is a truth they will never say aloud. They know that anyone who loves you properly will be better than them. This is a fear they cannot silence with words, cannot fill with a new supply, and cannot bury under bragging posts. It lingers inside them every time they imagine you smiling with someone else, being loved the right way, being seen, being valued, and nothing terrifies them more. 5. They fear you can see through them. The fifth fear surfaces when they begin to realize you no longer look at them the way you used to. For them, the most terrifying thing isn't that you hate them, it's that you see them. A narcissist can only survive as long as you remain uncertain, confused, and willing to believe that their words are true, that every burst of anger has a valid reason, that every blame they throw at you is because you were wrong, and that every time they abandoned you, it was because you were not enough. But once you step out of the relationship and your mind begins to clear, the things you once forced yourself to ignore start becoming obvious. You see the repeating patterns. You recognize the way they twist every story. You realize that their apologies never meant anything. You understand that their affection was only a tool to pull you back in. You begin to see the entire architecture of the game they were running from the very beginning. To them, this is catastrophic. Carl Jung called this moment the emergence of the shadow, when the parts they've worked so hard to hide are seen so clearly that manipulation becomes impossible. They don't fear your distance. They fear your clarity. They fear your eyes that no longer look at them through fog. They fear your voice that is suddenly calm. They fear your new composure because it reveals one thing. You are no longer trapped inside the maze they built. Dr. Paul Ekman's research on micro-expressions shows that once a person becomes aware, they start catching the smallest signs of insincerity, meaning the narcissist can no longer perform the way they used to. At the same time, Dr. Daniel Kahneman's studies on slow thinking show that once someone steps out of emotional chaos, their ability to analyze, reflect, and make decisions based on truth, not emotion, increases dramatically. This explains why, after leaving them, you begin to see through everything. And that is exactly what terrifies them. You have broken free from their spell. When you see the manipulation, they lose their weapon. When you understand the game, they lose their power. When you recognize the pattern, they lose the ability to trap you. And when you see who they really are, not the version they performed, their entire world becomes exposed. What unsettles them the most isn't the possibility that you'll speak that truth, but the certainty that you will never believe them again. They know that once you see clearly, they can't make you jealous. They can't confuse you. They can't make you doubt yourself. They can't make you feel wrong. They can't lure you back with fake apologies. Truth destroys their entire manipulation system. That is why they fear you. You see too clearly, too deeply, too consciously. They fear what your eyes reveal, not hatred, but understanding. Because that understanding means one thing. They have no power left over you. And for a narcissist, losing power is not just frightening, it is an obsession that eats them alive. 6. They fear you are no longer their source of supply. The sixth fear appears when they realize you no longer give them the one thing they are addicted to, your emotional energy. To a narcissist, your existence used to be a constant recharge for their ego. You reacted, they felt important. You hurt, they felt powerful. You tried to understand them, they felt worthy of attention. You forgave, they felt valuable. All of this inflated their ego, like oxygen feeding a fire. But when you stop reacting, stop searching for them, stop giving them even a drop of emotional energy, the most frightening thing begins. Their fire starts to die. And as the fire weakens, they must face what they have avoided their entire life: their inner emptiness. Narcissists never process their real emotions. They bury them, avoid them, run from them. The only thing that protects them from themselves is extracting emotional energy from others. Dr. Otto Kernberg describes this as identity diffusion, a fragmented self that cannot feel real when alone. Dr. Les Carter calls it inner collapse, the internal implosion that happens when they lose access to emotional supply. So when you withdraw your energy, they are pushed into the very darkness they feared since childhood. The realization that there is nothing inside. When there is no one left to blame, manipulate, or draw attention from, they feel a kind of emptiness that terrifies them. Without your eyes reflecting them, they don't know who they are. Without your emotional responses, they feel like they're disappearing. This is the panic they hide most, the fear of non-existence. To fight that feeling, they do everything. Jump into new relationships, post exaggerated displays of happiness, act overly confident, brag, create dramatic narratives about how amazing their life is. All of it is simply an escape, a desperate attempt to avoid the truth. When you left, they lost the person who maintained their ego for them. This fear isn't loud, but it is relentless. It shows up in the nights when they stare at their phone, waiting for a message that never comes. It shows up when they remember moments you cared, comforted, or tried to heal them, and realize no one does that for them now. And in those quiet nights, they come to a truth they will never admit. They needed you to feel alive, not because they loved you, but because you were the energetic mirror that told them who they were. When you disappear from their system, they fall into a psychological vacuum, a place where your silence echoes louder than any scream. And that is the sixth fear, the fear of facing their own emptiness when you, the only supply who truly understood, felt, and responded, are no longer there to help them escape from themselves. 7. They fear you will never return. The seventh fear emerges when they finally recognize something they were once absolutely certain about. This time, you might never come back. To a narcissist, relationships have never been a straight line. They are a closed loop. They hurt you, you suffer. They abandon you, you chase. They return, you forgive. This cycle convinced them that no matter how cruel they were, you would always come back, always try to fix things, always reach for the hand they offered at the last minute. It gave them a sense of invincibility, as if they owned a door that would always stay open. All they had to do was knock. But when your silence lasts too long, when your healing grows too deep, when you no longer follow the old rhythm, that confidence starts to crack. They begin to confront a possibility they never considered. You have stepped out of the loop. Carl Jung called this moment an archetypal breakpoint. When a soul breaks free from an unconscious pattern it has been trapped in for a long time. For you, it is liberation. For them, it is a threat, because they haven't just lost you. They've lost the power structure that kept their ego alive. They begin remembering all the times you returned, the times you forgave when you shouldn't have, the times you believed their tears, the times you hoped they would change. They saw all of that as proof that you belong to them. But when you don't come back this time, they can no longer rely on those old memories to soothe themselves. A cold truth crawls into their mind. The control is gone. No more cycles. No more leverage. No more narrative switching. No more pulling you back to resurrect their superior self. Dr. Ramani Durvasula's research on the narcissistic cycle shows that once a victim breaks the pattern, the narcissist experiences a loss comparable to losing a deeply embedded emotional supply, not just sadness, but an identity crisis. They don't know what to do when their life philosophy, "they will always need me," is no longer true. They may try to hoover you gently with friendly messages or aggressively with emotional theatrics, but if you maintain distance, their panic grows. Not because they want you, but because they can't stand the idea that you can live without them. When they see you standing firmly, they understand that the power they once bragged about has slipped from their hands. When they sense your peace, they know you're no longer trapped in the old circle. And here lies their deepest fear. Once you surpass them, they can never regain that power again. They understand that you have seen the truth, endured the pain, walked through the darkness, and people who have awakened never return to the places where they lost themselves. This is what haunts the narcissist the most. Not losing you, but losing the version of you that once depended on them, because they know that version is never coming back. 8. They fear your awakening. The eighth fear appears quietly, but it is the one powerful enough to unsettle them even while they pretend not to care. It is the fear that you will fully awaken, that from the ruins they created, you will rise in a new form, grounded, sharper, sovereign, and without any of the openings they once exploited. This is something they were never prepared to face. In their personal narrative, you were always the fragile one, the sensitive one, the forgiving one, the one who could be swayed by emotion. They interpreted your empathy as weakness, your patience as opportunity, your softness as a doorway into your psyche. But what they never understood is that every empath carries a shadow self, the strongest, brightest part of the soul, awakened only by a pain deep enough to break the old shell. Carl Jung called this individuation the process through which the soul destroys its old identity to step into its authentic essence, where strength comes not from others but from the depths of one's own being. When you reach this stage, the most frightening thing happens for them. They no longer have any power over you. You become unbothered by provocation, unaffected by their silence, aware of your worth without outside approval, clear that love is freedom, not bondage. You recognize narcissistic patterns instantly and refuse to be pulled in. This creates a version of you they do not know how to navigate. To them, you haven't just escaped. You have risen beyond their reach. Dr. Judith Herman's research on psychological trauma recovery shows that when a person regains inner sovereignty, they don't just become stronger, they develop an early detection system for manipulation, making them completely immune to people like narcissists. This is what terrifies them to the point of avoidance. You are no longer supply. You are a mirror reflecting their shadow back at them. Because when they look at your new strength, they see more than you. They see their own failure. They see their limitations. They see the gap between the person they pretended to be and the person they actually are. And that gap hurts them more than any criticism ever could. You become living proof that they once had a chance to love correctly, but destroyed it. They once had someone genuine, but failed to value you. They once had a hand reaching for them, but pushed it away. And when you become mature, self-governing, and no longer look at them the way you once did, they realize the truth they've avoided all their lives. The power they thought they had was never real. This is their greatest fear, that you have become someone they can never reach. Not because you moved too far, but because they never learned how to rise. And in that final silence, they confront the truth they tried to bury. You never lost them. They lost you. When you look back at the entire journey, you begin to see a truth you never dared to consider before. The one who was afraid of losing you was never you, it was them. Throughout the relationship, they made you believe you were weak, that you needed them, that you weren't good enough to be loved the way you deserved. But only after the discard, when the mask falls, do you finally see who was truly dependent on whom. The 8 fears they tried so hard to hide, their fear of your silence, their fear of your healing, their fear of you speaking the truth, their fear of you finding someone better, their fear of you seeing through their game, their fear of their own inner emptiness, their fear that you won't return, and their fear of you becoming the strongest version of yourself, all point to one undeniable reality. The power they once flaunted was never real. It only existed as long as you were hurting, confused, and unaware of your own worth. But once you awaken, that power shatters like glass. Jung once said, You become untouchable the moment you stop seeking validation from others. And that is exactly who you are now. You don't need them to define your value. You don't need to return to prove anything. You don't need to fight to win, because you already won the moment you walked away from the cycle that once held you captive. What they never expected was this: the discard wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of theirs, the beginning of panic, collapse, and the late realization that they lost the one person who ever saw the light in them. Meanwhile, from the moment you chose silence, you stepped into a different path. A path back to yourself. A path no longer driven by fear, but guided by intuition, self-respect, and clarity. And one day, you will understand this fully. You don't defeat them by proving you are better. You defeat them by no longer needing them in any part of your life. You walk away not to show your strength, but because you have learned a sacred truth. Your light was never meant for the hands that tried to crush it. That light belongs to you and only you. And as you move forward, they are forced to face the final truth, the one that hurts them the most. You are no longer there for them to punish, to convince, or to control. You've left the game. You've ended the story they thought they controlled. And in the very moment you walked away in silence, you became something they can never reach: free.